Melissa checked her reflection in the airport bathroom mirror and took a deep breath. 5 years had passed since she last visited her hometown. 5 years of building a new life in the city after her painful divorce. Now, at 38, she was back for her sister Nancy's anniversary party, and her stomach filled with butterflies at the thought of seeing everyone again. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "We're outside in the pickup area. Black car, can't miss us." It was from her nephew Jack. Melissa smiled, remembering the lanky teenager he had been when she left. Now he was 23 and had offered to drive her from the airport. Pulling her suitcase behind her, Melissa walked through the sliding doors and scanned the row of waiting vehicles. A black sedan flashed its lights, and she saw a young man waving from the driver's side. She barely recognized Jack. Gone was the awkward teen. In his place stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a confident smile. "Aunt Melissa," Jack called, rushing to help with her luggage. He wrapped her in a warm hug that lifted her off her feet. "You look amazing. City life must agree with you." "Look at you," Melissa laughed, patting his cheek. "When did you grow up?" "Somewhere between college and my first real job," Jack grinned. "Oh, I hope you don't mind, but I brought a friend along for the ride." He gestured toward the car where another young man was now standing beside the passenger door. "This is Tom," Jack said. "We work together at the engineering firm." "Tom, this is my famous Aunt Melissa." Tom stepped forward with an easy smile that made his blue eyes crinkle at the corners. "Jack talks about you all the time. It's great to finally meet you." He reached for her hand, and Melissa noticed his firm, warm grip. "All good things, I hope," she replied, feeling oddly flustered under his direct gaze. "Only the best," Tom assured her. The cool aunt who taught him to play guitar and snuck him into his first R-rated movie. They loaded her luggage into the trunk, and Jack insisted she take the front passenger seat while he climbed in back. "You'll be more comfortable up front," he explained. "It's about an hour's drive to Mom's place." As they pulled away from the airport, Melissa settled into the comfortable leather seat, watching her nephew through the rearview mirror. The countryside gradually replaced the city landscape, familiar fields and farmhouses appearing along the highway. She noticed Jack and Tom exchanging glances several times. Once Tom nodded slightly at something Jack whispered from the back seat. They both smiled in a way that made Melissa curious. "What are you two plotting back there?" she asked, turning to look at her nephew. "Nothing," Jack said too quickly. "Just catching up on some work stuff." Tom changed the radio station, finding a song Melissa loved from her college days. "Jack mentioned you're a fan," he said when she commented on the choice. "You've been talking about me a lot, it seems," Melissa said, raising an eyebrow at her nephew. Jack shrugged with a mysterious smile. "Just filling Tom in on the family he's about to meet." As they drove deeper into the countryside, the men exchanged another meaningful look. Tom cleared his throat. "Actually, we were discussing a small detour before heading to your sister's house, if you're not too tired from your flight." "What kind of detour?" Melissa asked, noticing how Jack leaned forward between the seats with anticipation in his eyes. "It's a surprise," Jack said, excitement making his voice rise slightly. "Something we've been planning since we heard you were coming home." Melissa felt a mix of curiosity and slight unease. What were these two up to? Whatever it was, they seemed almost giddy with excitement about revealing it to her. "You'll like it, I promise," Tom added, glancing at her with those striking blue eyes. "Trust us." For some reason she couldn't explain, Melissa did trust them, even though one was practically a stranger. "All right then," she said, settling back into her seat. "Surprise me." The car turned off the main highway onto a narrow road lined with tall pine trees. Melissa looked out the window, trying to figure out where they were taking her. This wasn't the way to her sister's house. "Are you going to give me any hints?" she asked, glancing at Tom, who kept his eyes on the road, a small smile playing on his lips. "You'll see in about 5 minutes," Jack said from the back seat. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the front seats. "Remember how you always said you never got to do anything fun when you visited home?" Melissa nodded. Family visits usually meant helping in the kitchen, attending children's recitals, and listening to her mother's complaints about her life choices. Fun wasn't typically part of the equation. "Well, we decided to change that," Tom said. He slowed the car as they approached a clearing. A large wooden sign came into view. "Lakeview Music Festival." Melissa's eyes widened. "No way," she whispered, straightening in her seat. "Is this?" Jack pulled 3 tickets from his pocket, waving them with a triumphant grin. The Heartbreakers are headlining tonight. Your favorite band from college, right? How did you know? Melissa felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't seen the Heartbreakers live in over 15 years. You left all your old CDs at Mom's house when you moved, Jack explained. I found them in the attic last month when I was helping her clean. The cases were practically worn out from use. Tom parked the car in a field that served as a temporary lot. Other concertgoers streamed toward the entrance, many carrying blankets and small coolers. Jack mentioned how much you loved their music, he said. I'm a fan too. Their second album got me through some tough times. I can't believe you did this, Melissa said, emotion making her voice shake slightly. No one had done something so thoughtful for her in years. Certainly not her ex-husband who had mocked her musical tastes. They got out of the car and Jack pulled a small cooler from the trunk. We've got sandwiches, drinks, and a blanket to sit on. The show starts in an hour, but we thought you might want to get a good spot. As they walked toward the entrance, Melissa felt a warm hand on her back. Tom guided her through the growing crowd, his touch gentle but firm. Stay close, he said. It's getting packed. The festival grounds opened up before them, a natural amphitheater sloping down toward a stage set against the backdrop of a shimmering lake. The setting sun cast golden light across the water. People spread blankets on the grass, some dancing to the music of an opening act. Jack found them a spot on the hillside with a perfect view of the stage. Tom spread out the blanket while Jack unpacked their food. Melissa watched them work together with easy familiarity, still stunned by their surprise. I don't know what to say, she told them as they sat down. It's the nicest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. You deserve it, Jack said simply. He handed her a sandwich and a cold beer. You were always there for me growing up. Remember when Dad forgot to pick me up from soccer practice, and you drove 3 hours just to get me? Melissa smiled at the memory. Your mom was working the night shift. Someone had to make sure you got home. You've done a lot for your family, Tom said, his voice soft. He sat close to her on the blanket, their shoulders almost touching. Jack talks about how you helped put him through his first year of college when your sister was sick. Melissa felt her cheeks warm. He exaggerates. I don't, Jack insisted. He clinked his bottle against hers. To the coolest aunt in the world. Tom joined the toast, and to new beginnings. The words hung in the air between them as Melissa met his gaze. There was something in the way he looked at her, appreciation, but also something more, something that made her heart beat a little faster. The music swelled as the main act took the stage. Familiar chords washed over her, and Melissa felt herself relaxed for the first time in months. With her nephew on one side and this intriguing stranger on the other, surrounded by music she loved, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, possibility. The concert was everything Melissa had hoped for and more. The Heartbreakers played all their classic hits, and she found herself singing along to every word. The music transported her back to a simpler time, before the divorce, before the stress of her city job, before life had become so complicated. As the night went on, the crowd grew more energetic. People danced and swayed to the music, their faces lit by the colorful stage lights. During a particularly lively song, Melissa got to her feet, unable to stay seated. Tom stood with her, while Jack went to get more drinks. You really know all the words, Tom said, leaning close so she could hear him over the music. His breath tickled her ear. I told you she was their biggest fan, Jack said, returning with 3 cups. He handed them around and then pointed toward the stage. Look, they're bringing out the acoustic guitars. This must be for Midnight Memories. My favorite song, Melissa gasped. The opening chords of the ballad filled the air and the crowd grew quiet. Tom's hand found the small of her back. Dance with me, he asked, his eyes reflecting the stage lights. Melissa hesitated, glancing at Jack, who gave her an encouraging nod. She let Tom guide her a few steps away from their blanket. His arms encircled her waist as they swayed to the gentle rhythm of the song. Being this close to him, she noticed how good he smelled, like cedar and something uniquely him. Jack talks about you all the time, Tom said softly, his mouth close to her ear. He says you're the one who taught him it's okay to follow his dreams. I just wanted him to be happy, Melissa replied, surprised at how natural it felt to be in Tom's arms. His parents had such specific ideas about what his life should be. Well, you made a difference. He wouldn't be at the engineering firm with me if you hadn't encouraged him to study what he loved instead of business. The lead singer's voice soared on the chorus, and Melissa felt Tom pull her a little closer. Her hands rested on his shoulders, and she was acutely aware of the strength beneath his shirt. Their bodies moved together perfectly, as if they had danced like this 100 times before. Over Tom's shoulder, Melissa saw Jack watching them, a pleased expression on his face. He raised his cup in a small toast when he caught her eye. She realized suddenly that this whole evening might have been his idea of a setup. When the song ended, they returned to the blanket. The band announced they would take a short break, and people began moving toward the food vendors and restrooms. "I'm going to grab some water," Jack announced, standing up. "Anyone want anything?" "I'm good," Tom said, not taking his eyes off Melissa. "Me too," she added. As soon as Jack walked away, Tom moved closer to her on the blanket. "Your nephew is quite the planner," he said with a small smile. "What do you mean?" "This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment idea. He's been talking about introducing us for months." Melissa felt her cheeks flush. "Has he now?" Tom nodded. "He thinks we get along well, and so far, I'd say he's right." Before Melissa could respond, a fat raindrop landed on her arm. Then another. Within seconds, a summer shower began to fall, light at first, then heavier. "Oh no," she said, looking up at the darkening sky. People around them scrambled to gather their things, some running for shelter, others pulling out rain jackets and umbrellas. The band members hurried to cover their equipment. "We should get back to the car," Tom said, quickly folding their blanket. They collected their things and started making their way through the crowd. Melissa looked around for Jack but couldn't see him in the confusion. "He'll meet us there," Tom assured her, taking her hand firmly in his. "He texted me." By the time they reached the parking area, they were both soaked. Rain plastered Melissa's hair to her face, and her thin blouse clung to her skin. Tom didn't look much better, his white t-shirt transparent and tight across his chest. They reached the car just as thunder rumbled overhead. Tom quickly unlocked the doors, and they slid into the front seats, laughing and breathless. "Some surprise, huh?" Tom said, pushing wet hair from his forehead. Melissa couldn't help but laugh. Despite the rain, she felt more alive than she had in years. "The best kind," she replied, meeting his eyes in the dim light. They sat in the car watching the rain pound against the windshield. Water streamed down the glass, blurring the world outside. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating Tom's face. In that moment, Melissa realized how handsome he truly was. "Jack just texted," Tom said, looking at his phone. "He found shelter with some other people, says he'll be here soon." Melissa nodded, suddenly aware of how alone they were. Her wet clothes felt uncomfortable against her skin, and she shivered slightly. "Cold?" Tom asked, noticing her discomfort. "A little," she admitted. He reached behind to the back seat and pulled out his jacket. "Here, it's not much, but it might help." Their fingers brushed as she took it, sending an unexpected jolt through her body. "Thanks," she said softly, draping it around her shoulders. It smelled like him. The rain came down harder, drumming on the roof of the car. Tom turned the key enough to power the radio but not the engine. The last notes of a heartbreaker's song filled the space between them. "So," Melissa said, breaking the silence, "you and Jack planned all this?" Tom's smile was sheepish in the dim light. "Not the rain part. But yes, Jack has been wanting to introduce us for a while." "Why?" She turned slightly in her seat to face him. Tom took a deep breath. "When Jack started at the firm last year, we became friends pretty quickly. He has photos of his family on his desk, including one of you. I asked about you, and he told me stories." He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "He told me about your divorce, how you rebuilt your life, how strong you were." Melissa felt warmth rising to her cheeks. "And that made you interested in meeting me?" "That, and I thought you were beautiful." The directness of his answer surprised her. "Jack noticed I asked about you whenever you came up in conversation. About a month ago, he suggested that maybe we should meet. So my 23-year-old nephew has been playing matchmaker." Melissa wasn't sure whether to laugh or be embarrassed. "He cares about you. He worries you're lonely in the city." Melissa looked out at the rain. "He shouldn't worry. I'm fine." Are you? Tom's question was gentle but direct. Before she could answer, the car shook with a loud bang. They both jumped. What was that? Melissa asked, her heart racing. Tom frowned and opened his door. Rain immediately pelted inside. Stay here. I'll check. She watched through the window as he circled the car, getting soaked all over again. When he returned, his expression was grim. Flat tire. And not just a little flat, completely blew him out. Can we change it? Tom shook his head. I checked. The spare is flat too. He pulled out his phone. I'll call roadside assistance. Melissa watched as his frown deepened while talking on the phone. When he hung up, he looked apologetic. Bad news. Because of the storm, they're backed up with emergencies. They won't be able to get to us until morning. Morning? Melissa felt a flutter of panic. But my sister is expecting us tonight. She'll worry. I've already texted Jack. He's letting her know we got caught in the storm and will be late. Tom hesitated. Looks like we're stuck here for the night. I'm sorry. Melissa took a deep breath. Spending the night in a car with a man she'd just met wasn't part of her plans, yet something about Tom made her feel safe. It's not your fault. At least we're dry. She pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders. Mostly. Tom smiled, then grew serious. Melissa, there's something I should tell you. This concert wasn't the only surprise we had planned. What do you mean? He ran a hand through his damp hair. Jack told me about how after your divorce, you stopped believing in second chances, how you built walls around yourself. Melissa felt her throat tighten. He said that. He loves you. He wants you to be happy. Tom reached across the space between them, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. The truth is, I've wanted to meet you for months. Not because Jack pushed me, but because everything he told me about you made me think you were someone special. The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Melissa looked at his hand so close to hers and felt herself at a crossroads. Melissa slowly placed her hand in Tom's, feeling the warmth of his skin against her cold fingers. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the car, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of emotions she thought she'd never feel again. I don't know what to say, she admitted. This is all happening so fast. Tom gently squeezed her hand. We don't have to say anything right now. We have all night, it seems. His smile was reassuring, without pressure. A text notification sounded from Tom's phone. He checked it with his free hand, still holding onto Melissa with the other. Jack says he's found a ride back to your sister's house with some people he met. He asked if we'll be okay until morning. Tom looked at her questioningly. Melissa nodded. Tell him we'll be fine. As Tom texted back, Melissa tried to make sense of her feelings. Here she was, trapped in a car with a man she'd just met, yet somehow it felt right. Was she being foolish? Or was this the kind of chance she'd been afraid to take for too long? You're thinking very loudly, Tom said, putting his phone down. Melissa laughed softly. Is it that obvious? You get a little crease right here. He reached out and gently touched the space between her eyebrows. The casual intimacy of the gesture made her breath catch. Tom, I should be honest with you. I'm not good at this anymore. Dating, opening up. I've been on my own for 5 years. I know, Jack told me. And that doesn't bother you, my age, my baggage. Tom shifted in his seat to face her fully. Melissa, I'm 34. I've had my share of relationships too. Not a divorce, but he paused, looking down at their joined hands. I was engaged once. She left me for someone else 3 weeks before the wedding. I'm sorry, Melissa said, genuinely moved by the pain she saw flash across his face. It was 2 years ago. I thought I'd never trust anyone again. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Then Jack started talking about his amazing aunt, and I found myself wondering if maybe second chances were possible after all. Rain continued to drum against the roof of the car, creating a cocoon of sound around them. The windows had fogged up, sealing them away from the outside world. In the dim light, with only the occasional flash of lightning, Tom's face looked both vulnerable and strong. This is crazy, Melissa whispered. I don't even know you. Then let's change that, Tom said. He reclined his seat slightly and turned toward her. Ask me anything. For the next hour, they talked. Melissa learned that Tom grew up in a small town 3 hours away. that he had 2 older sisters who still treated him like a baby brother, that he played guitar but wasn't very good, and that he could cook exactly one impressive meal, his grandmother's lasagna. In turn, she told him about her life in the city, her job as a graphic designer, her small apartment with a balcony where she grew herbs, and her disastrous attempts at online dating. The last guy showed up 15 years older than his profile picture, she said, laughing. When I called him out, he said I should be grateful anyone wanted to date me at my age. Tom's face darkened. What an idiot. It made me stop trying for a while, she admitted. Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain lightened to a gentle patter, and the time between lightning and thunder grew longer. Inside the car, however, the atmosphere remained charged. Tom reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Melissa's ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. Your hair is almost dry, he said softly. Is it? Melissa could barely hear her own voice over the pounding of her heart. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then, with aching slowness, Tom leaned forward. He paused, his face inches from hers, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Melissa closed the distance between them. His lips were soft and warm against hers, the kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, something he'd been waiting for. Melissa felt herself melting into his touch, years of loneliness and self-protection dissolving in the heat between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Tom rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I've been wanting to do that since I saw you at the airport, he confessed. Melissa woke to sunlight streaming through the car windows. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure of where she was. Then she felt movement beside her and remembered everything, the concert, the storm, Tom. Sometime during the night, they had both reclined their seats, and Tom had draped his arm protectively around her. She studied his face in sleep, the strong jaw now covered with light stubble, the dark lashes resting against his cheeks, the slight curl to his hair. It was hard to believe she'd known him for less than 24 hours. As if sensing her gaze, Tom's eyes fluttered open. For a second, he looked as confused as she had felt. Then he smiled, a slow, warm smile that made her heart skip. Good morning, he said, his voice husky from sleep. Morning, she replied, suddenly self-conscious. Daylight had a way of changing things, of making magic seem foolish. She sat up, straightening her rumpled clothes, aware of how she must look after sleeping in a car all night. Tom reached out and caught her hand. Hey, you okay? Before she could answer, a sharp knock on the window made them both jump. A man in a tow truck uniform stood outside, clipboard in hand. Tom quickly rolled down his window. Morning. You must be from roadside assistance. That's right, got your flat tire call. The man peered into the car, his expression knowing as he took in their disheveled appearance. Rough night. Melissa felt her cheeks burn, but Tom just smiled. You could say that. The concert got rained out, and we got stuck with a flat. No spare. The mechanic nodded. Well, let's take a look. For the next 30 minutes, they stayed in the car as the man changed their tire. The parking lot was mostly empty now, just a few abandoned vehicles and scattered debris from last night's festivities. In the daylight, the magical setting of the concert looked shabby and worn. About last night, Melissa began, not quite meeting Tom's eyes. If you're going to say it was a mistake, please don't, Tom said quietly. I wasn't. I live in the city. You live here. I'm going back tomorrow. What is this? What are we doing? Tom turned in his seat to face her fully. I don't know exactly. But I do know I want to find out. The city is only 2 hours away. I have a car. There are phones, video calls. If we want to make something work, we can. The mechanic knocked on Tom's window again. All set. You're good to go. Just sign here. Tom took care of the paperwork, and soon they were back on the road, heading toward Melissa's sister's house. The awkwardness of the morning had created a distance between them that wasn't there the night before. They drove in silence for several miles, the radio playing softly in the background. Finally, Tom spoke. Can I tell you something? Melissa nodded, watching the countryside roll by. Last night wasn't part of some elaborate plan. The concert, yes. Meeting you, yes. But everything after that? The rain, the flat tire, sharing our stories. He glanced at her. That kiss. None of that was planned. and I don't think I've ever had a more perfect night. Something in his voice made Melissa turn to look at him. The sincerity in his eyes couldn't be faked. Jack is waiting for us, you know, she said softly. He's going to be insufferable when he finds out his matchmaking worked. Tom laughed, and the tension between them eased. Should we tell him? Eventually. But maybe we keep it our secret, just for today? I like that idea. His hand found hers across the center console. Speaking of Jack, I should warn you. This isn't the only surprise he'd planned. What do you mean? Well, he might have told your sister that you're bringing a special friend to the anniversary party. Melissa groaned. So my entire family is expecting to meet my new boyfriend. Afraid so. Tom looked sheepish. I tried to talk him out of it, said it was too much pressure, but he was convinced we'd hit it off. Smart kid, Melissa murmured, giving Tom's hand a squeeze. Apparently he knows me better than I know myself. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to her sister's house, Melissa saw Jack waiting on the front porch. He stood up when he spotted the car, a huge grin spreading across his face. Ready to face the music? Tom asked. Melissa took a deep breath. With you? Yes. Jack bounded down the porch steps as Tom parked the car. His smile was bright and knowing as he approached. Finally. We were starting to worry, he said, opening Melissa's door. Mom's been calling every 20 minutes to see if you were here yet. Melissa stepped out, suddenly aware of her wrinkled clothes and tangled hair. Sorry about that. We had some car trouble. Jack's eyes darted between her and Tom, who was retrieving her suitcase from the trunk. Car trouble, huh? That's why you two never made it back last night? Melissa felt her cheeks warm. The tire blew out. We had to wait for roadside assistance this morning. Uh-huh. Jack's grin widened. He stepped closer and whispered, You've got that look, Aunt Mel. What look? The same one you teased me about when I met Emma in college. That something happened look. Tom joined them, suitcase in hand. Everything okay? Perfect, Jack said, clapping him on the shoulder. Mom's got breakfast waiting. Everyone's dying to meet you, Tom. As they walked toward the house, Melissa felt a flutter of nerves. It had been one thing to spend the night talking with Tom in the intimate bubble of the stranded car. It was another to bring him into her family home, to face her sister's knowing looks and her mother's inevitable questions. The front door opened, and Nancy appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Melissa, then moved to Tom with undisguised curiosity. There you are. We were worried sick. Nancy hurried down to embrace her sister, then whispered, You look like you slept in your clothes. I did, Melissa replied quietly. Car trouble. I'll explain later. Nancy pulled back, studying her face intently. Whatever she saw made her smile. Well, come in, and this must be Tom. She extended her hand. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Davis, Tom said, shaking her hand. Sorry we're late. Nancy, please, and don't worry about it. The important thing is you're here now. Come in and have some breakfast. The anniversary party isn't until this evening, so you have plenty of time to rest and freshen up. The kitchen was warm and filled with the smells of coffee and bacon. Nancy's husband Ron sat at the table with their 2 teenage daughters and Melissa's mother, Evelyn. All conversations stopped when they entered. Everyone, this is Tom, Nancy announced, ushering them in. Jack's friend from work and Melissa's. She paused, glancing at her sister questioningly. Friend. Melissa finished quickly. Tom's my friend. The look that passed between her mother and sister spoke volumes. Evelyn stood, extending her arms. Welcome home, dear, and welcome to our home, Tom. The next hour passed in a blur of food, coffee, and conversation. Melissa watched as Tom charmed her family, answering questions about his work, laughing at Ron's terrible jokes, complimenting her mother's blueberry muffins. Jack sat back, occasionally catching Melissa's eye with a knowing smile. After breakfast, Nancy showed Melissa to her old bedroom, now converted to a guest room. You can rest here. The bathroom's all yours. I put fresh towels out. As Nancy turned to leave, Melissa caught her arm. Nance, about Tom. He's wonderful, Mel. Handsome, polite, clearly smitten with you. Is it that obvious? The way he looks at you? Absolutely. And you're not exactly subtle either. Nancy smiled. So what really happened last night? Melissa sank onto the bed. We went to a concert. His idea, actually, well, his and Jack's. They planned it as a surprise. Then it rained, the car got a flat tire, and we ended up spending the night. Talking. Just talking. Nancy raised an eyebrow. Well, not just talking, Melissa admitted, a small smile playing on her lips. But nothing like what you're thinking. Nancy sat beside her. I haven't seen you look this happy in years. Not since before David. At the mention of her ex-husband's name, Melissa tensed slightly. It's too soon. I barely know him. Sometimes you just know. Nancy squeezed her hand. Mom likes him already. She's showing him her garden. And Jack seems to think he hung the moon. Jack orchestrated the whole thing, Melissa laughed. He's been playing matchmaker for months, apparently. A knock on the door interrupted them. Jack poked his head in. Sorry to bother you ladies, but Tom's asking for you, Aunt Mel. Says he has one more surprise. Melissa looked at her sister, who smiled encouragingly. Go on. Don't keep your friend waiting. As she followed Jack downstairs, Melissa realized that her nephew and his friend had indeed done something shocking to her in that car. They had reopened her heart.